Hello, family and friends. Today is Mother's Day in the year 2020, and today I want to tell you about my mother. Ruth Estabrooks was born in 1918 in a family in New Brunswick and Pointe-du-Chien, which is a suburb of Shediac, on the Atlantic coast of New Brunswick, in that strait between Prince Edward Island and the mainland called the Northumberland Strait. She grew up skating on ice in the wintertime in the Pointe-du-Chien harbor, swimming all summer at Parley Beach, right there on the sandy shore of the Atlantic Ocean. And she was, as she says, a tomboy. She played sports as well as any boy. In fact, she was the only girl left-handed pitcher on a boys' softball team when she was in high school. Ruth grew up in a large family. There were 15 kids altogether. 4 of them died as young babies. She thought she was the baby in the family, being the 10th living child, until 10 years later when her sister Bessie was born as a surprise. And Aunt Bessie is her only living sibling yet alive today, living in New Brunswick in St. Martin's. Aunt Bessie wrote a book about her sister, our mother, and it was called The Book of Ruth, which, surprisingly, she did for Mum's 90th birthday. Mum lived to 1 month shy of 91, and she experienced what Diane and I often wished many people did. We would come home from funerals and say, "Oh, wouldn't it have been nice for that person to have heard all those kind words and those wonderful things said about them?" Mum experienced that because on her 90th birthday, we had a big party and people came from all over Canada. My brothers from Calgary came into London, and she heard people share how much she had meant to them and what her impact on them had been over the years. And it was beautiful for her to hear these wonderful things before she passed away 11 months later. Well, her father was a carpenter, Charlie Bridges. He was a brilliant guy in school, but he didn't like school, so he dropped out after 6th grade, which you could do in those days. And people would often say to him, "How come you are only a carpenter?" And he would say, "What do you mean only a carpenter? Our Lord was a carpenter, and Charlie Bridges is never going to be ashamed of being a carpenter." He was involved in many projects, one of them helping build houses in Halifax after the explosion there in 1917. Mum grew up and went to Shediac High School, and after high school spent a year at a Bible college in Rhode Island, USA. And that impacted her life significantly because she had come to faith in Jesus through a witnessing team at the railway station in her town. One weekend she's going by and hear a bunch of young people out sharing their faith publicly at the railway station. She listened and was very, very intrigued. So she went back a week later when they had their next meeting. And at that meeting, she gave her life to Jesus and committed herself to follow him for the rest of her life. After Bible college, she came back to Moncton and began working there, staying with friends who introduced her to a guy named Ruth Estabrooks, a young pastor who was just starting his pastorate after getting his education in the USA. They married on September the 1st, 1941, and had 4 boys, Paul, David, Stephen, and Philip. All Bible names, and Mum was an actual miracle worker. Dad was a pastor in the days when pastors were hardly paid anything, and it was a struggle for her to keep the family afloat with a little bit of budget that she was allowed to have, or that she actually was able to work with. She had about $25 a week to do everything: feed, clothe, and look after her husband, 4 hungry boys, and herself. And she did it. She did it all those years, and she was amazing. We loved that lady. And she left great impact on us. And today I want to tell you about the spiritual impact that Mother left. The first thing she did when we were young and now living in Kingston, Ontario, going to elementary school, was that we read the Bible through with Mom every year. Now, if you read 4 chapters a day, in 1 year you will read through the entire Bible. And Mom had us from the time I was about 8 years old. That would have made David 6, Stephen 4, and Phil hardly even 2. And yet all 4 of us would sit around the table in the evening, because Dad was usually out at some kind of meeting or other, which was expected of ministers in those days. And she would read with us through the Bible every year. And we did this year after year. And what an incredible introduction it gave us to the Bible, even though it was King James English, which was difficult enough now. Then it was even more so as a young child. But very understandable, because Mom was a great teacher. We learned how valuable the Bible would be in our life. A book that was written over 1,600 years in time by more than 40 authors, and yet had such a coherent message that shared how God wanted sinful human beings in His holy presence. And He provided a way through His Son, Jesus. And that coherent strain goes right through the Bible, and we learned that year after year as we read the entire text, and gained a tremendous respect for this book. But it was also her faith in prayer with that holy God that also impacted me. In 1957, we moved from Toronto to a little town called Waterford. And it was a lovely little town. We enjoyed those years there. But when we arrived there at Christmas of 1957, Mom and Dad were totally broke. It cost them everything to move, and they had nothing for Christmas presents for their 4 boys. And every year, the minimum we would get would be a hockey stick behind the couch. In fact, that wasn't even the only gift ever, but there would always be hockey sticks behind the couch as a last item on Christmas morning. Well, that Christmas, we didn't know it, but Mom and Dad had nothing in the bank and no money, barely enough just to buy a turkey and some food for the special day. Mom went to prayer, and she talked to the Lord. And the Lord told her to find out from the boys what they wanted for Christmas. So she asked us weeks before, what do you guys want for Christmas? And all I remembered was that I wanted a powder blue V-neck sweater. And David had some other request, and Steve and Phil others. Well, a few days before Christmas, the church in Kingston, where we had lived for more than 6 years and Father had pastored there, sent a missionary barrel, as it was called in those days, which was like good used clothing and special items, to us in Waterford. And would you believe, in that missionary barrel were 4 things, among many others, that each of us 4 boys had asked for Christmas. I got my powder blue V-neck sweater. And only later did we know that our folks did not buy those things. They came in the missionary barrel as an answer to our mother's prayer. I saw it personally then the next year. 1958, Waterford High School had their first football team, and I was determined to be on that team, even though I was the smallest guy on the team, and I had to eat like crazy to get to the required weight of 150 pounds. I made the team, and there was one requirement about equipment. The school paid for all of that heavy equipment that football players wear, except for the boots. And we had to buy our own football boots. And in those days, football boots cost $13. Well, you won't believe this probably today, but my mom and dad didn't have $13 to spare to buy a pair of football boots. But they said, we're going to pray and ask God to provide those boots. And every night at devotional time, Dad prayed about these need for these football boots. And my mom told me, You just trust the Lord. He's going to provide it for you. Well, one night, not too much before the deadline to buy the boots, which was the first game, by the first official game we had to have our boots, the telephone rang. And Mom answered the phone, and she came back with the biggest smile, and she said, "Paul, I think God has answered our prayer in a way we never would have suspected." She said, "Mrs. Toll from the church, she and her husband are now such seniors that they say they cannot harvest the grapes from their vineyard they have in the backyard. And they said it's loaded this year. You're going to need about 18 bushels to harvest it all. They said, we can't do it now at our age, so your family is welcome to come and harvest the grapes." After school, for the next few days, every one of my brothers and my dad and my mom, we went to that vineyard and we picked those grapes into bushel baskets. And then, using our wagon, we boys would go door to door, and we sold those grapes for $1 a bushel. And until we had 13 of them sold, and I had my $13 for football boots. I never forgot that. And the impact of even my family's commitment to helping with that project in order for me to get those boots. Well, we picked 18 bushels altogether, and so 5 of them came home, and Mom made grape jelly. From the rest of them, half of which she gave to neighbors and friends, which was typical of my dear mother. I learned about faith in God through my mother. Well, everybody loved Mom. Her sister, Aunt Bessie, loved Mom dearly, and wrote that book called The Book of Ruth for her 90th birthday that I showed you. And in the book has lots of poetry, because both Bessie and Mom loved to write in rhyming verse, and especially rhyming couplets. And Bessie was and is still a wonderful, wonderful person, reminding me so much of my mom. She was loved by her husband. He could not say enough about her, especially in his later years. Dad would just rave about how much Mom meant to him and how much she had done in terms of enabling him to be the minister that he was over the years. And of course, her boys. We 4 boys adored this woman, and all through our lives we never forgot what she sacrificed in order for us to have what we needed. And when Dad died, she wanted an opportunity to hear the singing of her voice, because we sang at Dad's funeral. The 4 of us were often sang a cappella quartet. So we produced a CD called Mama's Boys, and here's a clip.
For he knew me, yet he loved me. He whose glory makes the heavens shine, so unworthy of such mercy.
That's just a little clip of what the Mama's Boys sound like, and you can hear all 13 cuts of that CD we produced for Mom on my website, which is paulestabrooks.com. You just have to make sure you spell the last name correctly, and you get it easily, paulestabrooks.com. She was also loved by her grandchildren. I mean, grandchildren adore their grandparents somehow, even more than their parents. It's amazing. And here's half of her 10 grandchildren in an adoring picture. And also her great-grandchildren. By the time she passed away, Mom had 10 or 11 great-grandchildren, and now has 20-some. If she was still living, she would be absolutely over the moon. So, that's Mom. And on her 90th birthday, we put together at the back of Aunt Bessie's book called The Book of Ruth, we put together some letters from people who wrote tributes to Mom. And one of them was Audrey Harder. Her name before marriage was Audrey Seymour, and she lived with us many days when she was going to high school in Kingston and stayed at our home. And she was the closest thing to a sister that we four boys ever had. And here's what she wrote. I shall always be eternally grateful for the many words of instruction and encouragement that came from your mom. After you four guys were tucked in bed and your dad went off to the bowling alley after hours, because it was either free or cheaper at that hour, your mom and I would sit out on your veranda and talk and talk. I can still remember also sitting in your mom's Sunday school class while she taught a handful of us girls. It made an indelible impression on me. I do not ever recall a single complaint from your mother about your dad's late working hours or the demands the church made on him. I learned a lot about a philosophy of ministry from watching her. Suffice it to say that her example in the faith, diligence in her work, and her love for the Lord encouraged me and gave me confidence that propelled me into the ministry that I had. That's the impact of a life committed to the Lord. That's the impact of Ruth Estabrooks.